You're opening with your poem.
Oh, so I am.
So you are.
But then, what is a tree or a plant, if not an act of kneeling to the earth, a way of bidding the water to move, of taking in the mouth the inner part of the world and coaxing it out, not just the aching leaf buds in spring, the cloud of pollen, or in autumn the children knocking branches for the shower of seed, but the people who kneel in the woods at night, the woman waiting by the gate, offering to each visitor a small portion of the world in which they might work for the life of it. That was from a poem called Dryad in Sean Hewitt's debut collection, Tones of Fire.
Absolutely lovely. Thank you for all of
that. No worries.
So, welcome back. Episode 2 of An Infinite Deal of Nothing.
Literary ramblings.
Oliver and I have just posted a slightly controversial TikTok.
Well, you posted a slightly controversial TikTok.
Okay, let's not say me when it was you. It was like I was like, oh, I don't really know if we should post this, and he was like, yeah, no, post it. Right? And you were the one that went and got the book off your bookshelf, and I was like, no, because the whole point of it is that no one knows what we're talking about.
Oh, they have to know what we're talking about. Also, like,
you just like to be a hater.
If we're gonna post on TikTok, we've got to rile up the BookTok crowd.
Oh, are we posing a war against the BookTok crowd? Is that what you're trying to do here?
Nope. But I do enjoy.
But you better not, because you're not the one that's in charge of the TikTok, and I'm the one that has to deal with comments.
I do enjoy winding people up, especially on TikTok, especially when I don't even have it, and I can do it without the app.
Thanks to me. Thank you for subjecting me to that.
Pastoral poetry.
Pastoral poetry. That's what we're discussing. Well, pastoral.
Yeah.
Just pastoral art. That's what we want. That's what we want to discuss today. I think we were sat in the pub and we were like, "Oh, do you know what people don't really do anymore? Pastoral art."
They don't dedicate significant portions of effort, time, or writing physical words on the page to our devotion and appreciation of nature anymore.
Well, perhaps they do, but I think maybe it feels like it's not as much of a spectacle anymore. So
it's not as present in literary culture as it used to be.
Yeah, we'll start off with a bit of discussion of what is pastoral poetry, what is pastoral.
Yeah.
So I did lots of research, but also we should actually be educated on this, because this is like our degree. Pastoral comes from most notably pastures. So it was originally writing or pictures, painting, whatever, or music based on pastures and shepherds in their little fields doing their little business with their sheep. But ultimately, pastoral is a celebration of nature, rural country life. It is idealism of man's relationship with nature, and I know, came up with that one from my noggin. But I think the thing that is most central to this discussion that we're going to have today is that pastoral has always been used to discuss nature as not only preferable to urban life, but the ideal place or environment or even state for humans to exist in. But I think it's really important to note that it's not a genre. It is a mode of writing.
Yeah.
I think that's really something that we need to remind ourselves of as we go on this journey.
I think a lot of times it is discussed as a genre, and I think I've done that myself in the past, and I think I still do it.
Yeah.
Accidentally, or if not willingly at times.
Yeah.
And I think, especially because of the 100% I see it, and I love it when I do see it, but because of the kind of departure from it in like literary culture at the moment, especially in very recent publishing, and I am very aware that it's a huge, broad scope to have, and there's nowhere on this earth I can know and read everything. So I'm just talking about my specific kind of small window scope into books and publishing that I have. But it's something that, I think is definitely left by the wayside, and it used to be that a sequence or a series of poems or a collection of poems. Obviously, Seamus Heaney's prime example or entire novels, hardy novels. They're what some people would call pastoral novels
as a genre,
because they relied on nature and the environment as a vehicle for their storytelling, for their narrative. Nature as a vehicle for narrative.
Yeah, and I think that's what we want to touch on this episode is sort of bringing it back. I want to bring back pastoral poetry. I think one thing that we want to try and do on this podcast is push people to go read more, push people to go write more, push people to know more. I think one thing is we have degrees, we're going to get a degree in English literature. And I think rather than perpetuating the superiority complexes that can come with those things, I want to share my knowledge. I want to talk about things that I know. And so that's why I'm sort of doing a bit of a historical segment on pastoral poetry, because that is what I love. So speaking of, pastoral comes in many artistic forms, as I sort of said. So you've obviously got the music, art, plays, poetry, prose. One example of a play that is considered a pastoral play is As You Like It by Shakespeare.
Oh, okay.
Again, any excuse to talk about Shakespeare. But also poetry, one of my favourite poems that is like a really quite prominent pastoral poem is Thoughts from My Sick Bed by Dorothy Wordsworth. Obviously Wordsworth's, I think it was his sister. And one of my favourite lines from that poem is, I thought of nature's loveliest scenes, and with memory I was there. And then you've got your prose that you spoke about, which is Ali Smith.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ali Smith, I said that as kind of an instant reaction, because she's kind of my gut reaction to everything, because she somehow manages to touch upon everything ever. I thought initially, because on the surface level of her seasonal quartet, and although it's not super explicit in the text itself, but implicitly, not even implicitly, but through the titles, through the seasonal quartet, she is, as I said before, using nature, seasons, the cyclicity of nature as a vehicle for narrative. I think the fact she called that series the seasonal quartet shows that no matter how much we move on or evolve as a society, urbanize as a society, we can't escape the seasons. We can't escape the movement of nature. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, speaking of movement, I think one of the things that people now shy away from for pastoral is the classics have sort of put a really weird dampen on pastoral, I think, because obviously they're most... I mean, pastoral was a whole movement, but there's a weird frowning upon moments in classic literature where we spend time describing nature and spending time in nature, and 9 times out of 10 there is a reason for it. 9 times out of 10 there is a reason why the author is setting that scene up. Maybe there's things implied within that scene, because that is ultimately what pastoral is for. But I think it means that now, even I find it as a writer, I really shy away from doing descriptions and things like that, because people can be like, there's plenty of memes about it, and I mean, I've been there, I've totally read Charles Dickens and been like, bloody hell, shut up. Yeah. But I think we've gone from one extreme to the other, which was, there's every book had this really long bit always, or to now just no, we don't talk about it, and we try and just do either very minimal descriptions or very much trying to do that showing, not telling. One thing that I really want to talk about, because bringing my classical music knowledge in, because not only am I a classicist with literature, I'm also a classical musician. Yeah. So I want to take an opportunity to talk about that. So actually, this is not a shocking this is not out of the woodworks underground classical music. It's Beethoven. And it's actually one of his more famous symphonies. But yeah, Beethoven's Symphony No. 6 is actually called Pastoral. But one thing that was really interesting with Beethoven's 6th Symphony is in the writing of the sheet music, he gave each of the 5 movements a written description to explain what was going on in the music and what he was trying to portray. So the first one was Awakening of Cheerful Feelings and the Arrival of the Countryside, then A Scene by the Brook, then Merry Gathering of Country Folk, then Thunderstorm, and then Shepherd's Song, Cheerful and Thankful Feelings After the Storm. And I think this perfectly explains to you what pastoral was at its core. It was cheerful feelings on the arrival of the countryside, some shepherds and a brook and this and that. You hate it though. Well, we were saying this before. Like, Erica's introduced me to this, well, not concept, but this idea before, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting to know and to kind of further our discussion. I don't know. I didn't like it. I think it's quite an unhelpful way, because the music should speak for itself. Yeah. And I think he, as you were saying, always had just relied on the music to speak for itself.
Yeah.
This was definitely something different for him to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just don't know how I feel about that. Just such explicit. This is the music, and this is what you should. This is the imagery that it should, give you.
Yeah, which perfectly leads us to our next discussion, which is pastoral as writers. It's such a versatile mode of writing, and it will literally do anything that you want it to do, and it can put forward, anything that you want it to put forward. Pastoral itself, keeping on the history vein, it can be traced back all the way back to like the 8th and the 7th century, which is a very, very long time ago. So it's been a thing for a very, very long time.
That's long ago?
Thank you. One thing that's really interesting about pastoral is it's always been used to portray a golden age. So even for the ancient Greeks, we used to label it as the ideal period in man's history, was when they were writing about all the pastoral and saying how lovely everything is. But most notably, it was popularised again in the Renaissance era, which is my favourite era of literature. Bringing you in, why would you say is good to write the pastoral? What is the process of writing pastoral poetry?
I kind of just think of it as another kind of writerly technique. It's a formal choice for me personally. I think it's, depending on the writer, it's kind of subjective, but it's your kind of decision to open your kind of like writer's toolbox and, take out the pastoral pen and kind of use that to your advantage. I think one thing that's particularly important about it, and just I think with us and nature in general nowadays, is that what we seem to have done, especially with like the vast urbanisation that we have now and technological advancement, is we seem to we've separated ourselves from nature and forgot that we always have been and still are a part of nature.
Yeah.
I think it's so important to not see yourself as separate to the natural environments that surround you. I mean, it's inescapable that when you are in somewhere, like in a kind of more rural place, or there's a change in the air, there's a kind of embodied reaction to that. One thing that I'm particularly interested in, have been for a very long time, and I think more so as I kind of progress as a writer, is rules, restrictions, boundaries, ultimately limitations. You have that classic saying of you have to know the rules to break them.
Yeah.
And I don't know where I stand on that, because, who says you should learn the specific rules of a certain type of poem and follow them? Nobody kind of has that standing anymore. If you want to, and use that again as a way of thinking in order to articulate your thoughts in a way that portrays them how you want them to come across. That was a very clunky way of saying that. In your final piece, and you want to use them limitations and boundaries, I think it's, particularly useful. Think of, most widely known, a sonnet or a haiku. Yeah. If you go in with the intention of writing a sonnet, and that's going to assist in your portrayal of your emotion, your feeling, whatever you perceive a poem to be, I suppose. For me, a poem is a feeling. Then so be it. But what I'm going to say links this back to pastoral, is that I think there's no kind of correct way to implement the pastoral into your poetry.
It can just happen.
It can just happen, and I think it's important not to go in necessarily with the mindset of, I'm going to write a pastoral poem, because then you're drawing so explicitly on them themes, and I think if it's required of the writing, it will come naturally.
Yeah, I can see that.
Like a long poem, you know of it, a long poem that I worked on for a long time called Fledglings, was never kind of written to be a pastoral piece. It was meant to be a piece about two people becoming friends over love of poetry, and it just so happened that the ideal setting for that was this kind of rural village. Yeah. And then, as with everything, kind of Seamus Heaney started snaking his way into that.
Shocker.
The pastoral, I think, is most powerful for me personally as a writer when I'm using it as a vehicle for nostalgia.
Yes, yeah. Well, this is the thing. So, as I sort of touched on earlier, pastoral is really versatile. So in the past, the reason why it was actually quite commonly used was nostalgia, but also, and I think this is quite relevant to modern writing as well, it allowed people to critique a lot easier and a lot more, with a little bit more nuance, with a little bit more allegory, sort of, sneaking their way around. whether it was to criticise monarchs or the government of the time, whatever it was, they would, or, you know, the church, anything that would offer quite serious consequences, they would use pastoral, they would use the pastoral, I need to say use the pastoral as a way of sort of getting around that, but also communicating it. But also, I think, personally for me, the pastoral is most powerful when it's used in relation to love. One of the most notable poems that sort of combine those two ideas, for me, is Who So Lives to Hunt, I Know Where Is a Hind, by Sir Thomas Wyatt. Because it's believed, the historical sort of theory around it is that it was believed to be about Anne Boleyn and his romance and his love for her, but, you know, actually professing your love for Anne Boleyn,
insane,
you're gonna die. Yeah. So combining those two ideas together to sort of speak about monarchy or whatever that has insane consequences, but also talking about romance, I think that's a great poem to check out if you've not read it, and also pick apart. Also,
trust in form. You know, you're saying you're at risk of death, like under Henry VIII.
Yeah.
Psychopath.
To put it mildly.
And, you know, if you're putting that much trust in, you know, the pastoral as a function, the poem as a form.
Yeah.
I think that says a hell of a lot.
A hell of a lot.
Speaks through history and time.
Our next piece of discussion is going to be quite a big one. Sort of a turn off. Buckle in. But before we do that, we're gonna take a little breather.
Okay.
Because we've done a lot of like history knowledge. We're going into some debate now.
Oh, are we now?
What have you been reading this week?
Oh, I forgot this was coming. Okay.
It's a weekly segment.
I know, right. This week, actually, it's right here. I have
Lovely.
just started reading Strange Beach, which is the first in Fitzgeraldo's new poetry series. Starting at the end of January, so keep your eye out for these when they come out. Because
I'm such a sucker for Fitzgerald editions.
Yeah, and the new series design for the poetry is really good. This isn't it. It has like a blue kind of box.
Oh.
So it's sticking with the vibes, but
I love it.
Yeah, very, very excited to carry on with this. It's bizarre and abstract and wonderful and pastoral. One
thing that I'm going to put out there really quick in this segment, because I think it's worth noting, you read a lot more than I do. A lot more often than I do. You've read a lot more this year than I have. I think you've read a lot more in your entire life. I'm a bit of a shit.
Well, no, I don't think that's one thing that annoys. We were talking about this. One thing that annoys me about, especially online book discourse, is that everything is kind of judged by figures and numbers.
Yeah.
I never kind of discuss how much I read with people unless it, you know, kind of comes up. It's not something that I'm concerned with.
No, but I get a weird insecurity about it.
Yeah.
Because like especially, it's like when someone asks you, "Oh, do you know that thing?" and then you're like, "Yeah, totally."
But
like
I think that's
sometimes
quite important.
I can catch myself doing
given
that.
the toxicity of online, I think that's a very valid. Like, I'm not saying you should be insecure, but it's a very valid insecurity.
Yeah.
Given the.
It was something I was worried about going into this. Was that I feel like I struggle. Maybe it's just because I'm like constantly procrastinating. Maybe it's the ADHD. I sometimes really struggle to just sit down with a book. I love books. I love reading. But yeah, no. So I'm not going to pretend that I actually have been reading this week. I started to read for uni, but I don't really think that really counts because I did 40 pages in one day and that's all I've read this week.
And that was after 3, 1, 2, 3.
Tristan and Shandy. But it's weird. It's interesting.
Are you not loving it?
I feel a little bit better after the lecture we had today. I can't lie. I feel like because I was so excited for this book.
We were hyping up like all semester.
I'm so excited about it. But I've also tried to avoid everything that it's about, to go in with as much of a sort of fresh head as possible. Mm-hmm. I think it screwed me over a little bit, and I got a bit lost because it is such a digressive book.
Discombobulated book.
Very discombobulating book.
Yeah.
But after today's lecture, I feel so much better.
Good.
Yeah, thank you, Adam, for that.
I'll be continuing my Reader Volume 1 tomorrow morning.
Yes, me also.
Pre-seminar.
Pre-seminar, pre-rehearsal, and then we're watching The Holdovers.
Films.
Oliver doesn't watch movies.
No, I don't have an aversion to them. It's weird that I have the attention span for a book, but
Not the attention span for a
not
movie.
the attention span for a film.
I get that. But also I don't. The big question of the day is...
I don't even know what this is.
Why have we become less inclined to produce pastoral art? And have we?
I don't think necessarily we have, as such.
Mm-hmm.
I think... how do I say this without, like, slamming people? I think... I think...
Just be controversial, Oliver.
I think modern media, contemporary book culture in certain circles, the mindset of conglomerate publishers is changing. Obviously, it's changing the trajectory of what publishing is and what is being released and what kind of manuscripts are being accepted into a, by an agent and by an editor. Yeah. That's definitely a big part of it, but that doesn't necessarily mean I think people are less inclined to write it.
No.
I think it's less inclined to be published on a grand scale by big publishers because they're too bothered about money.
I'm going to pretty much agree.
Mm-hmm.
So we're saying, ultimately, it's just the advancement of audiences, society, whatever. So let's discuss that.
Mm-hmm.
So, a big thing with the pastoral, is that it can be argued that it is grounded in religion.
Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously, our current society is incredibly secular. We have moved so far away from religion. It's no longer as prominent as it used to be. But the significant development in the history of pastoral was actually the advent of Christianity. Even though, as we've said, it existed prior to. But I would totally blame John Milton for this.
Okay.
Because he went on to consummate this link with the pastoral and religion in Paradise Lost. There's a really famous section where Eve is addressing Adam. With thee conversing I forget all the time, all seasons and their change, all please alike. So those two lines I really want to just spend a quick second with.
We're close reading, guys. Reading.
Oh God, no, don't say that. We've just got our marks back for a close reading. I don't want to talk about that. So she literally forgets the seasons, the changing, all of that. Ultimately, the whole scene is about her adoring nature and the religious conversation that's surrounded around that, because it's literally Adam and Eve and also Eden. I mean, personally, when I think of pastoral and I think of religion, I'm going to go straight to the Garden of Eden.
I don't.
Really? I think that might be my, student brain, though. I think when we were in A-levels, I think that's what I was just taught to do, was just...
I mean, I think...
nature.
When I think pastoral, I do think, classical pastoral, fine.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't necessarily go to... I haven't read Paradise Lost, although it's something I would like to do gradually, spend a lot of time with it in the future.
Agreed.
But personally, when I think pastoral and poetry and older, more traditional poetry, well, actually it's completely untraditional poetry in my opinion, but I think Jared Manley Hopkins is who...
But again, that's still religious.
Well, this was what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Is he was, incredibly religious.
Yeah.
It was his life. He was a man of the church to a very significant level. And I think this actually goes back to what we were talking about before with the Thomas Wyatt poem, because having that trust in pastoral abstraction, having that trust in the form, because there's a lot of discourse around him hiding his homosexuality.
Yeah.
And when you close read a lot of his poems, it's definitely there. It is definitely there. But a lot of them, again, are they're very nature soaked. And I think using that as a form of abstraction, but for yourself, a kind of clarity in your articulation of your sense of self, I suppose, is definitely something to consider.
Honing in on that, a lot of writers that did write pastoral and are famous for writing pastoral got that adoration from nature from religion. Is pastoral actually religious? I mean, you say it's more spiritual.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And I have a very, very stark line.
Even though Christianity and John Milton perpetuated the prominence of pastoral writing, it did exist before Christianity. As we said at the start, it primarily comes from the 7th and the 8th century. So people like, Sappho and things like that, that was all entirely pastoral based. I mean, even Ovid's Metamorphosis.
Mate, a woman is a tree.
Yes, but that also comes from the Greeks.
But a woman is a tree. Personally, because I'm not massively into Greek shenanigans. Well, I've just never really delved into the world, but I only have once with a certain author, and definitely loved it. Madeline Miller. I can't remember what I was saying because I'm too distracted by how shit Song of Achilles is now. But
you can't leave that in.
I absolutely can.
You can't. Is urbanisation the reason that we don't write pastoral poetry anymore? Or pastoral writing anymore?
I think it shifts our focus.
Right.
This is what I find, especially... I think you can contextualise this or kind of put it in the context of the environment in which you write in. I think if you're... For me personally, the best things I've probably ever written have been when I've been somewhere different, somewhere away from my usual environment, typically quiet, typically somewhere surrounded by nature in some capacity, at least to a greater extent than I am, in this house or whatever. I think it just changes your mindset, your focus shifts completely. Yeah. So I think when you're kind of in that urban environment, especially in a big city, a big corporate city,
you're less inclined to engage in the pastoral.
Exactly, you're less inclined to engage, and it changes the way you think. It changes the way you see the world.
Absolutely.
It changes the way you see time. A corporate world sees time it fashions time in a kind of fast manner way, but also it's split into kind of working hours. Yeah. Which obviously differs massively once you step outside of that urban environment.
Just to argue with that though, personally, when I'm in urban surroundings, I feel myself more inclined to write pastoral because and I think this is what you see in classics as well. It's a nostalgia, and this is something we sort of mentioned. But it's an escape, and I'm more inclined to place my characters in a place of natural serenity and beauty because that is what I long to experience at that moment in time.
So do you think that if you were somewhere rural, you'd have an inclination to write urban poetry?
Potentially, because I think you romanticise whatever you're not with. Speaking of pastoral as a result of longing, that was actually quite often why it was written in the past. We briefly spoke about the Greeks being seen as a golden age. We now see 100, 200 years ago quite as a golden age. I think even now we see poetry from the Romantics as them talking about their current surroundings and us being like, wow, that's so amazing, I want to go there. The same way that they would have seen Greek poetry and or Greek pastoral. And that is quite interesting. But to go to what you were saying and talking about the urbanisation and talking about writing pastoral in urban society, the thing is with pastoral, it was, and I think for me most notably, quite often used to discuss the endangered environment that nature was becoming. And
now we have reached the Anthropocene.
I think so. Like a great example of this would be The Garden of Love by William Blake, which is a very short poem. It starts off, I went to the Garden of Love and I saw what I had never seen. A chapel was built in the mist where I used to play on the green. And the gates of this chapel were shut, and thou shalt not writ over the door. So I turned to the Garden of Love that so many sweet flowers bore. And I saw it was filled with graves and tombstones where flowers should be, and priests in black gowns were walking their rounds and binding with briars my joys and desires. What Garden of Love shows, and I think is a great reason to continue exploring using pastoral, is that we are separating ourselves from nature. I think it's interesting that poem's also grounded in religion as well. That's a conversation that we've had.
Sorry, I'm very stuck with the idea of pastoral being grounded in religion. Yeah. Because I know it is. Yeah. To some extent, and in a lot of contexts.
Because I think the thing is,
but that's so objectively, yes. There's a lot of discourse around pastoral or nature. Yeah. And religion being intrinsically linked, simply because of the creation of the earth, quote unquote, by a certain sentient being.
A certain arguably,
yeah. But what pastoral means to somebody is so entirely... It goes back to what we talked about spirituality before.
Yeah.
Not even versatility, subjectivity.
Right.
But not even subjectivity, it's so intrinsically personal.
Yeah.
So I think to make a broad sweep and say that it is rooted in religion doesn't sit right with me.
I think that's where the root of religion comes in, though. With religion, its relationship with nature is incredibly central. You are taught to, or rather encouraged to, have a very deep relationship with nature and your surrounding environment. And therefore I think that the interesting thing about Pastoral is acknowledging that link to religion is not a bad thing. That was the strongest form of love. And so to have love of any form sort of interweave those two things brings its own beauty to things, I think. I think that's why, to me, pastoral writing will always be so gorgeous, especially when it's used to describe love, because I think love is the most natural thing we feel.
So do you see it as gorgeous because
No.
of its links to religion?
No. I think I find it gorgeous because I like the idea of worshipping nature, and I think that acknowledging that it has some sort of connection to religion.
Well, because I suppose worshipping nature and worshipping God is the same thing because they are intrinsically linked.
Yeah.
God is nature, nature
I
is
think
God.
I think that's what I'm trying to get at here is pastoral. Back in the day, to worship nature was to worship God.
Yeah, if you are so inclined.
To worship beauty was to worship God.
Yeah.
Because that was what he created.
So you could basically apply that to any discussion we had in terms of forms of writing.
Yeah. This was a hard episode.
So do you think there's nothing about pastoral writing that gives it a power regardless of its religious links?
I think, yes.
Does it have a power beyond that?
Absolutely. It absolutely does, and I think that's why I want it to remain a very prominent mode of writing. But I think that it's important to acknowledge that the love we have for nature has become less fixed in our mind as a result of secularisation.
Yeah.
Whether that link is incredibly strong or whether that link is incredibly minor. When religion was so central to society, we were taught how beautiful nature was.
I just think it's interesting that you're saying that a religion's view of nature, is incredibly moving to you.
Yeah.
So you're separating that from your own kind of personal view of nature. So do you see as ascribing to I'm just interested.
No, this is interesting.
So do you see as ascribing to a religious view more powerful than your own intrinsic personal view?
No, I just think they're quite similar. I think my own personal view of nature is quite spiritual, and I would say I wouldn't necessarily align with religious theology, but I would say that I align with the religious need to worship nature. I don't know, I think there's a sickening beauty in worship of things, because it is so grounded in devotion. Like
a sickening beauty.
Yeah.
Why sickening?
Because it's not healthy at times.
But I think a true devotion to nature is not sickening at all.
Potentially not. I think that there's something so dual-faced in nature.
Of which we are a part.
Oh, absolutely. Sickening in the sense of eating a sweet.
Sickly sweet.
Yes. You go into it and you take a bite of it and you enjoy the taste, so you overindulge very quickly. It's very easy to overindulge. The overindulgence of nature, you start seeing every side of it, and you start seeing the good and the bad, the ugly.
The easiest way I would put it, from my kind of personal view, is nature represents to me equilibrium. So from our society and our separation from nature, if we connect with it, it allows us to restore ourselves, our sense of self, and our connection to it. But in its own right, nature itself isn't equilibrium. It is a give and take. It's a restorative, cyclical thing.
To add to that, I think the reason why I love and hate nature and find it sickening is because it's such a reflection of ourselves, and it's not a nice reflection. sort of looking in a mirror, and I'm so disappointed with modernity when I look at nature.
In that sense, I agree with you. So it's weird that in kind of a juxtaposing sense, when we engage with it, it restores us, but if we engage with it, I'm getting your point.
Yeah, you're getting that.
If we engage with it too much, then you see a kind of reflection of our own primitive instincts.
Yeah.
Because we're, as a society, we're not at peace with what we are truly like, because we kind of live in this false, fake,
creation,
masked world that relies on this extreme cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
My only kind of tangible way of putting it is primitive instinct, but I think there's like way more to it than that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think the only reason you're describing, saying you look at it too much and it becomes kind of sickening because you're seeing a reflection of yourself, it's because we're not at peace with what we are truly like.
Oh, absolutely.
If kind of the structure of our society was stripped away.
Absolutely. There's something so beautiful about describing nature as sickening as well. There's like a corruptive beauty in it.
So we have very different perspectives on this.
I don't think we do. I think we are very similar. I just don't think I'm communicating it very well.
I think I just have an issue with the word sickening. It doesn't sit right with me.
No, I definitely sit with that. What I would give to live amongst nature entirely, but the fact that that feels so out of reach in modernity makes it sickly to me.
So it's not nature itself, it's your disconnect with it.
Yeah. Pastoral is a great example to look at when discussing the immortality of literature. Because how long it's been there. And it sits there in the little corner. And I think it will always exist, no matter how quietly it exists. If you're out there and you fancy it, I think we should probably give it a try to embark on writing something pastoral at some point in the near future. And if you're unable to find or think of some sort of nature that you want to embark on, maybe divulge in some ekphrasis, which is one of my favourite forms of writing.
I think it's the ultimate form of writing.
I think it's a great form of writing.
Because inevitably everything you write is influenced by something else. Thus, everything you write is ekphrastic in some way.
Wow, we've got another episode idea.
Well, I think that is so true.
I think that's very true too.
Nothing is entirely original, ever.
Yeah.
It always has some kind of engagement with something else, even if it's in the most minor way. And the second thing, I think the intrinsic link with writing is with nature. You can try your absolute hardest to write something that does not have in any way any link to nature, and you will fail. It's impossible. As pedantic as you want to be about it, there's no escape from nature, no matter what you try and write.
And it's different forms.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's pretty true. Feeling a bit somber after that.
I know.
Feeling a bit mellow.
It's all that sickly talk.
Sorry.
I don't like it. It unsettles me. I have a real issue with the word sickly, if you can't tell.
I love that word.
It really unsettles me.
That's why I love it.
But my relationship with nature is not unsettling at all.
Oh, it is for me.
Well, that's the conclusion. We actually disagree.
Wow! Let's go!
This has never happened before.
Look at two people high-fiving over disagreeing. This is what we need in the world right now.
Yeah. So, thanks for listening, and see you around at some point in life.